www.thebrightforest.com.
How much further do you recon? Lizzie's question broke through Lewis's thoughts. They were walking down the main avenue of the abandoned town a few miles from Hilltop. Luckily, they still had Javier's car, so it had been a short ride. They looked up from the map, piercing her lips. "We should be getting there in a couple blocks," he assured her. Stashed the main map on his back pocket and looking around. The street was deserted. Rustic cars were strewn around. A few lampposts had been torn down. Their cables had been wrapped around the poles. They saw a few corpses littering the streets, most of them mangled or at least mutilated in any way or another. This must have been one of the first two towns to fall, Lewis thought ruefully, imagining the chaos would have spread to major cities. As they got to the crossroads, he stopped in his tracks and held out an arm for Lizzie to stop. He looked around, examining the shore fronts. One of the corners was a laundromat that advertised lower prices in the summer. Some of the other stores included clothes shops and a small supermarket. The signs of the corner read Lawrence Street and Lincoln Avenue. "We're here," he announced, checking the map once again and nodding. This was the last place Maggie heard from these guys. "They checked in about 3 hours ago," Lizzie said, her hands on her hips. "They could be gone anywhere within 40 blocks radius, even the walkers blocking their way." "Well, I don't see any walkers right now," he replied, shrugging. "I suggest we spread out and search for clues for these stores. Jesus said they would be looking mainly for the electrical supplies, so the laundromat and that the hardware store is our best bet." "You take the hardware store," she suggested, offering the man a soft smile. "Holler if you see anything. Right back at ya," he replied, making his way to the store with his trusty chair leg at his side. He pushed open the door, and a little bell announced his arrival. He looked back at Lizzie, whose back was turned to him. Taking a deep breath, he ventured in. Inside, the shelves were occupied most with spaces that they were picked clean. Dust was covering the surfaces. He deduced that there was nobody in there in years, let alone the last day. He placed the narrow aisles, carefully inspected with whatever automatically his eyes could pick up. The shelves themselves contained nothing out of the ordinary aside from occasional platter of his dry blood. When they got back up to the office, it was pitch black. He used a flashlight provided by Maggie, who shined the room. Cheryl's at the ready. He almost jumped when he heard a soft, low growl from his left. A walker had been lying against the wall with both its legs trapped underneath an old-timey television. Its bony arms failed so weakly in his direction. "Poor guy must have bled out," he breathed, shaking his head solemnly. With one well-paced swing at the chair leg, he crushed his skull and put it out of his misery. No matter how many times he did it, he never got used to that feeling. He did a quick sweep of the rest of the room, cursing under his breath when he came up to an empty of clues or supplies. He slowly walked through the store once more, inspecting the shelves and researching everything he missed. He didn't get very far when a blood-chilling scream tore through the streets and his eyes perked up. Pushing open the front door, he ran full speed in the direction of the scream. Once outside, he caught a glimpse of a couple walkers lazily drooling inside the laundromat and Lizzie's screams erupting from it. He ran inside, catching the attention from one of the walkers. With a strong swing of his makeshift bat, he swatted its head clean off in front of him. Lizzie shrugged within the robust walker as the other one had a strong grip on her curly black hair. Her hunting knife lay on the ground next to her, out of reach. He decided that the big guy was his main priority, and with a running momentum, he tackled it to the ground, unleashing his own knife, and plunged it deep into its skull. Quickly getting to his feet, he used Cheryl's to shatter the other walker's arm, loosening the grip on Lizzie's hair. The rotting hand fell to the floor, releasing her from the deathly grasp, making her trip. Lewis decomposed himself of the second walker with ease, breathing heavily as he turned to Lizzie, who was still on the ground. "Need any help with that?" he joked, offering her a hand. She took her hand and heaved herself to her feet. They both stood silent for a moment, their hearts in their mouths as they were breathing with difficulty. When they had composed themselves, she looked into his eyes, sighing with relief. He gave her a lopused grin, and then it was started when she did the last thing he expected her to do. She kissed him. Too stunned to the fact that Lewis's eyes opened wide, his hands releasing Cheryl's onto the floor. Once regained control of his body, he swatted her hand, which was resting comfortably on his shirt, away from him. He forcefully pushed her away, his mouth agape and his brow now frowned at the moment. He looked like a deer with two massive headlights. "What the hell was that?" he exclaimed as he regained his voice. "I'm sorry," she blurted, stepping forward. She raised his arm, stopping her advances. "Stay back," he hissed with venom in his voice. "Do you remember why we're doing this? We're here in this hellhole to rescue these people from Maggie, huh?" I did. She started searching for the words but couldn't come. "We're here because I need to find my wife, Lizzie, and fast," he growled, his voice dangerously low. "What even can you give me an idea that I'd be okay with that? I thought we had something," she trailed off, looking down ashamedly. Lewis pinched the bridge of his nose, shaking his head, and leaned down and took the chair. "Look, I'm sure you're a great girl," he said, beginning to fidget with the urge to roll his eyes. "But I'm married, Lizzie. I love my wife very much, and nothing is going to change that." Lizzie scratched the back of her head, unable to meet his fiery gaze. "I'm sorry," she muttered, her voice barely above whisper. He brushed past her, leaving the chair leg over his shoulder and stopping at the door. "Oh, and Lizzie," he said, beginning to look up at them, "don't ever kiss me again." They walked silently down the avenue, looking around in the search for men of where they were supposed to be rescued. Every now and then, Lizzie would have a spare fleeting glance for Lewis, who kept his eyes fixed on the road. His head was a jumble of thoughts. None of them were pleasant. How he had been so blind, he would have sensed something didn't even add up about her. She's way too cheery about this whole mission. As they walked, he kicked some rubble on the ground, looking down at the ground. Right now, he couldn't concentrate on Lizzie, and he had to find these men and bring them back to safety. "You recon that they went this way?" he asked Lizzie, who huffed in response. Rolling his eyes, he kept walking forward, his question quickly answered when they heard a couple of muffled growls coming from somewhere down the street. They had a concerned look on their eyes. Widening, Lewis broke apart the sprint and pinpointing the source of the noise with that abandoned bar whose sign was hanging loosely. They burst into the interstate. Weapons were brandished. The faint light that seeped over the door illuminated the bleak of the scene up ahead. Most of the tables were turned over, a few chairs splintered beyond the recognition. The bar was covered in black mold, and most of the alcoholic beverages had long ago been ransacked. A few walkers roamed around with their low grumbling noise, making the hairs on the back of its neck stand up. He counted even 7 of them, as they didn't notice them yet. He and Lizzie made a short work on the stranglers, working together to take them out that took interest in them. When they were all dead, an eerie silence fell on them. Lewis and Lizzie looked around in search for any remaining walkers. When they found one, Lewis deemed it was completely empty. "Is anyone here?" Lewis asked as he asked into the dimly lit room, raising Cheryl's over his head. "We're not here to hurt you." "Don't shoot, please," a weak voice replied from behind the counter, a bloody hand raised above it. "We're unarmed." Lewis looked to his left to see Lizzie stood with her rifle full trained on the bar, and he gestured her to lower it, and she begrudgingly did so. He approached them with his arms raised. "I'm coming to you," he said. "Are you Mike and Chris?" He turned to the corner to see the 2 men standing on the wall, hidden behind the counter. One of them was a tall blond man with a shaggy beard, and he was kneeling beside his friend, who was clutching his stomach as if life depends on it. It probably did, Lewis thought. Blood stains on the man's shirt, spider webs around his chest. "Yeah," the blond man said slowly. "Who are you?" he inquired with a raised eyebrow, his eyes never leaving Lewis. "Name's Lewis, and this is Lizzie," he gestured to the woman behind them. "Maggie sent us to check on you. She seemed to think that you might have gotten into trouble." "And she was dead on," Lizzie commented with a bored tone, leaning against the bar. The blonde stood up, dusting himself off. "We ran into a bunch of walkers when we were trying to get back into the office. They cornered us and we got trapped." Lizzie looked around and noticed a deserted bar, rotten bodies littering the floor every few feet. "Well, they're gone now. Let's go," she said sharply, clapping her hands together. Both the men stood in the worried glance, piercing his lips. Chris took Mike's hand and nodded. The man on the floor straightened up with effort, lifting his blood-stained shirt. Over his abdomen was a pulsing bite mark, with a few rotten teeth still clinging to the torn skin. "One of the walkers got the jump on me," he explained, looking down at it. Chris got it, but it was too late. "I couldn't just leave him," exclaimed Chris. His brows knitted tightly. Lewis looked down at the bitten man, and a sigh escaped from him. "Does this crap ever end?" he thought ruefully. Shifting his weight towards his side, he turned to the blond man. "What about you? Are you hurt?" The man shook his head, running his hand through his hair. Just leave me out and get out of here," Mike groaned clearly in pain. "I can't do that, man," replied Chris, his voice breaking. "I can't lose you too." The freckled man looked on his head. They were losing precious time on a lost cause. "Look, he's not going to make it. We gotta go before more of those things show up." "I'm not leaving without his sentence was cut short when the gunshot ran for the bar. Lizzie stood with a handgun in her hand, pointing at Mike, who now had a bullet through his forehead. His body fell to the floor. "What the hell?" exclaimed Chris with bewildered expression of his face as he fell to the knees beside his partner. "We can't keep wasting time," she said matter-of-factly. "Now get up and come with us." Lewis stared at the woman with wide eyes, although her intentions were noble and rather rash decision that had finally startled him. As Lizzie made her way outside, Lewis kneeled to Chris and placed a comforting hand on the man's shoulder. "I'm sorry, man," he whispered, taking a deep breath. "I know it's a horrible time, but you gotta come with us. After that gunshot, this place will be swarming with walkers." "I didn't even get the chance to say goodbye," lamented Chris, tears swelling in his eyes. The freckled man stood up at his hips. "Right now you have to survive long enough to grieve him. I'll talk to Lizzie later." Chris accepted his words and planted a small final kiss on top of Mike's head before standing up and following Lewis outside. Lizzie walked ahead of them, her assault rifle in hands. Lewis made a point to walk beside the blond man, who kept dragging his feet down the downcast eyes. Every few feet, a walker would stumble out of its hiding spot to approach them, only to be shot down immediately by Lizzie. Lewis shook his head, just wondering what the hell she was thinking. 20 minutes later, they arrived at the spot before they left Javi's car. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon, planting a sky bright orange. Lewis got in the driver's seat, turning down the key. Silently, the trio drove away from the walker-infested town and towards the road. Barely a half an hour to an hour later, after an agonizing quiet area drive, they pulled up at Hilltop's gate. They got out, Chris looking positively ghastly as he took in the wooden walls. Before they approached them, Lewis stopped and ran in front of Lizzie with a stern expression. "What the hell was that?" he whispered, attempting to keep Chris away from listening. "Whatever you mean," she said, crossing her arms. "The merest senseless of killing a man," he exclaimed, throwing his arms in the air. "Lewis, he was bitten," she stated, shrugging. We are wasting time, and like you said, we don't have much of that." He opened his mouth to retaliate, but came out empty. Running his hands through his dreads, he started looking at the direction of the gate, signaled to the guard, and nodded to open them. Once inside, Maggie and Jesus already rushed forward, and the woman was devilish, and Chris then frowned. "Where's Mike?" she said. Chris looked up for the first time and leaving the town and sighed. "He was bitten," he said simply, looking at Lewis for the moment. The freckled man and silently pleaded them that he did not divulge how he had gone down, and the blonde seemed to understand. "We have to put him down," he added. "God damn it!" Jesus exclaimed, kicking a tire that is nearby a wall before storming off towards a tent. Maggie sighed, watching the man leave, and then she turned to Chris and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry about that, Mike, but I'm glad you're safe. You're back safely." He nodded, walking in towards the group of people sitting around the fire. He took a seat and accepted beer from a young woman. Maggie looked back at Lewis, tilting her head. "Did you run into any trouble out there?" she inquired. Louis glanced sideways at Lizzie, who frowned and shook his head. Nope, he reported. Just sucks that we couldn't get him in time. Well, at least you got Chris back, she consoled him. If Mike was bitten, there was nothing you could have done. The man nodded slowly and mulling over the evening's events. Maybe there was nothing they could have done to save him, but recognized Mike's execution could have been handled differently. Maggie led them to the admin building, going straight to her office. Javi was waiting inside with his hands bound on zip ties. When he laid on them, he sighed in relief. Louis, Lizzie, you're back. What happened to you? You, Lizzie asked, eyeing the bindings. The man looked down and chuckled. Jesus thought it'd be funny, he said, avoiding an explanation so the other two wouldn't be inquired further. True to her word, Maggie used a knife to cut off the ties and sitting down behind her desk. As the other three took the seats, she leaned and frowned. She thanked them again for the service and getting straight to the point afterwards. So, Javi, tells me your wife has been kidnapped by the right's arm, she begins. Louis nodded. We've had a few run-ins with these people, ruthless pieces of crap. There's a lot of them. Their business is taking people from larger communities than theirs and trading them for a whole lot of supplies. Then we gotta give them supplies, Louis argued, slamming his fist on his desk. It's not that simple, she replied sadly, shaking her head. Usually they reach out to the community for people who belong with a simple message for the greater good. At first we didn't know what to make of them, but now we have had 4 cases so far. Did you even give them supplies each time? Louis asked, cocking his head. Yet the other two sat silently and exchanged. Lizzie twiddled with her fingers as Louis spoke, almost immediately to the subject matter. We did, but there's the problem. Javi tells me Clem is a fighter, right? Toughest woman I know, Louis said proudly, puffing his chest. That's what I feared. What do you mean? If they captured her and they're trying to find out her group's whereabouts, do you think she'd give them away? Javi said, this time speaking up for the first time. Louis's thoughts immediately scratching behind his back, said, that didn't sound like the Clementine we knew. No, she'd tell him to F off. Exactly. And even if she tells them that she's in Richmond, I don't think Myers would believe her. She was taken away outside out of her usual hunting grounds. Myers? Maggie asked, raising a brow. Their leader, he exclaimed. He used to live in Richmond, and he and his people were adamant on attacking their communities, like Richmond used to do under Jones Region, and it was a way to subsist. When he tried to reorganize the group, I had to kick him out. Louis cleared his throat, sensing the subject changed dramatically. So you don't have any idea where the location would be located at? We have a rough estimate, yes, he replied, opening a drawer full of papers and withdrawing with the torn map inside of it. Every time we meet their representatives, it's been around this general area. She then circled the zone about 30 meters in the diameter, about a day's drive away from where Louis knew Richmond was located. That's pretty close to where Clementine was taken, actually, Javier said, scratching his beard. I reckon that she should be sending a scouting party tomorrow and prepare a rescue plan in the meantime. Sounds like a plan, Louis said, nodding. He looked up at Maggie and smiled. Thank you so much for helping us. She smiled back at him and nodded. My pleasure. For what it's worth, I really hope you find your wife. Thank you, he repeated, standing up. With a short glance at Lizzie, he looked at Javier and grinned. Let's go and find my wife.
Why, hello there, my little pretties. It's me, the Shadow Lioness. I hope you all enjoy my video of creepypasta. So, without further ado, if you liked the video, please leave a like. And if you want to survive my cave of terror, please hit the subscribe button down below. Leave a comment in the comment section down below. Donate to my Patreon when you can. And the only way you're going to survive me in the cave is you're going to have to sub to me and press the bell for notifications so you'll get to know when I upload. Well, without further ado, my little pretties, I'll see you in the next video. Sweet dreams, my little pretties.